So, really, you join me at a very perilous time. I'm running out of Iron Brew. I'm running out of Iron Brew again, and it's my own fault because I only buy them in 2 bottle batches at the moment, and therefore I keep running out of Iron Brew and have to keep getting more. And I don't even have the excuse that I visit the same store and moon over an age-appropriate cashier. Nope. I always go to different stores, and half the time I get it delivered by Deliveroo. So, yeah. I am literally just being lazy and just buying 2 bottles at a time and then running out of Iron Brew. Now, why am I bringing up something which is quite so absurd to talk about? Why am I bringing this up? Well, that's probably going to be on the par with what most people think about today's topic. It is absurd. And I would argue it isn't absurd. It's a worst case scenario. It's a worst case scenario. And there are variations on this worst case scenario, there really are, and there are some really unlikely ones and some more possible ones. And the thing is, I want to approach this, and I want this to be clear, this is not a critique or a criticism of American isolationism or a pro-American isolationism. That's not really something I get to care about much. I'm not an American. I'm British. The accent should have given it away. But the thing is, I come from a school of thought where you always prepare for the worst case scenario and hope for the best. That has always been my methodology. That has been what I've been taught from as a young age. And just because the situation is absurd and would never happen and is never going to happen because no one would ever do this, doesn't mean you don't prepare for it. Because sometimes the unthinkable to you is thinkable to others. And sometimes it happens. And by Lord, I am starting to sound like Bill Maher, but we'll leave that to one side. That is the reality we're talking about. We are talking about what happens if the worst case happens. What should Australia, Canada, and Great Britain do from a naval maritime security perspective? I am not going to be talking about the economics. I'm not going to be talking about the social, the political, the army, the air force. I'm not. And I am talking short term because how things evolve long term are going to depend on a whole range of scenarios which you cannot predict because this is such a left field scenario, such an out of bounds scenario. We cannot really predict. So we're talking about what would be the short-term operational requirements, what would be the short-term procurement requirements, what would be the short-term necessary things they do. And there are problems for all three of these nations. But there are also opportunities for all three of these nations in such a situation. It's complicated. And also, before I get too far into this, I should point out this is a patron premiere. This was voted for by my patrons. And if you like this video, or even if you don't like this video, but if you'd like other topics to be considered, then if you're a patron, well, you don't just get to suggest topics. I then put them into a vote, and then it's the majority votes which get made. And currently there is a vote live now. And when the vote is over, there will probably be a patron suggestions put live, because usually I like to run the patron suggestions for about a week or so, and then run a vote for a week or so, to give people time to vote. And that's how I work. I work very much, it's not individual questions, it's sort of, these are questions which can be made into a video. Today's video is not going to be a particularly long video, because the longer I make it, the more I end up going off into, whilst it would be logical land to me and logical to follow from me, it would sound more and more like fantasy to anyone listening, because literally it'll be logic based on logic, based on logic, based on logic. And therefore it would pretty much by definition be fantasy. But this is going to be logic based on the situation, without going 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 steps beyond that, based on the existing logic. But still, I like alternate histories, and I've always believed that, again, planning and when you're preparing for national security and national defense and all these things, you need to think about the worst case scenario. And you need to have some stuff in place to cover the worst case scenario. However unthinkable, unlikely it might be, you need to have something to cover you. With that being said, let's consider the likelihood of American isolationism. Now, it's nothing new. And I think we have to be very careful when we start talking about American isolationism, what we exactly mean. There are some people who will tell you it's going to be, America's going to completely be isolated. If they go isolation, it's going to be completely economically isolated. They're not going to trade with the rest of the world. They're not going to communicate with the rest of the world. They're going to completely shut down. No, I don't. Not only do I consider that unlikely for this scenario, I consider this unlikely for any scenario. Mainly because America's economy isn't set up that it can go that way that quickly. It can't. It really can't. The global economy is not set up that way. Especially once you're dealing with the really niche high-end goods, we're talking microprocessors and things like that. You have to have. There's a lot of interconnectivity around the world. America could get there. They've got the space, they've got the resources, they've got the people, but they can't get there at the snap of the fingers. So this question did originally, in its original form, have within the next 5 years. So again, I'm using that as priority. If they decided to go isolationist in the next 5 years, it would take longer than 5 years for America to go completely economically isolationist. And also, there's the other problem of then their companies wouldn't be able to sell to people abroad, and they might not like that. I can think of a fair number of companies who would not be happy about their profit margins in that case. McDonald's being one of them. And so, American economic isolationism, I don't consider likely. I'd also not consider it likely for tourist isolationism. I think you'll still get American tourists travelling around the world. So culture exchange will still be going on. Hollywood will still exist. All these things. So the American isolationism I'm talking about is the American isolationism which has been around for a long time. President Washington himself has this great speech he makes in his farewell address where basically, I'll read it out and then I'll give a little more of an explanation of it. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. Europe has a set of primary interests, which to us have none or a very remote relation. Hence she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the cause of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. So far, I mean, as we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be understood as capable of patronising infidelity to existing engagements. Now, that basically means we don't break our word, but we don't want to give it either. We don't want to be allies unless through necessity. We don't want to do that. That's fine. That's a perfectly reasonable position for a nation to take. It's a complicated position because often nations tie economic agreements with security agreements, especially these days. You often find that political clout comes with the ability to spread your influence, and if you aren't able to base and aren't able to secure things around the world, you really can't affect things as much as you might like. Yes, you can hit from a long way away. You have very long-range weapons. But if you're not going to actually occasionally put boots on the ground and deal with the consequence of those weapons, you're going to find yourself lacking a lot of support. The other problem, and this is the other thing for America in this with isolation, is whether they choose to not sell their weapons. Again, there are going to be many very rich, influential companies who'll be very annoyed about that scenario. So the likelihood, again, is no. There's also the likelihood that most weapon systems, most modern systems these days, involve things coming from multiple countries, and components of these coming from multiple countries, which makes it very difficult even for America. Short term, within 5 years. That's the point, within 5 years. They could do it, but it's going to cut off options for them in terms of their procurement. And it's also the factor that who's going to step into the vacuum they're going to create. If they're not selling weapons, if they're not providing support, who steps into that vacuum, and what is their view on the stuff still going to America, whether that's raw materials or supplies? That's the other problem for America in this isolationist scenario. America could find itself with lots of problems because of the way the world economy, the world has been set up. They're not problems without potential solutions, but they are going to be solutions which are going to be 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. You cannot just go, change. It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. So, with that being said, what kind of isolationism do we therefore tend to prepare for? Well, diplomatic and alliance isolationism. A withdrawal from NATO, a withdrawal from standing alliances. Those things, yeah. America is so important to those scenarios, to those alliances, that it is a worst case scenario if they withdraw. So therefore, you should be doing some preparation. And I would point out, this is where countries like Britain, like France, like Australia, like Canada, like Germany, like all their allies, haven't. They haven't done any preparation in case of that scenario. They've treated it as such an unthinkable scenario that no one has allocated funding towards it. Well, let me put it this way. There have been people who've wanted to allocate funding towards it, but they've been shouted down with funding for other things. Because after all, it'll never happen. It'll never happen. There have been so many things in recent years which will never happen, but which have happened. COVID, Brexit, all sorts of things. I really wish the people who say things will never happen and therefore we shouldn't prepare for them would take a day off. But we'll leave that to one side. That's personal gripe, and I'm not here for a personal gripe. So, Canada. Well, Canada has interesting issues in this scenario. Over and above the whole current politics things and the whole joys about America, the American-Canadian debate about some American political leaders putting forward the idea of Canada becoming a state. I think it will be multiple states, and I'm not sure if the current ruling party of America would like to take on those states, because they might have very differing political views than they do. Leaving that to the side, they willingly want to take on the problem that is the Quebecois. Not even Canada really wants to take on the problem that is the Quebecois. Good luck. That's all I'm saying. We're leaving that to one side now. That's not this discussion. This is a discussion of, is Canada, what does Canada do if America starts to go, okay, we're not taking part in any international relations, we're not doing any alliances or anything like that. We're withdrawing from all our ally commitments, and I'm presuming the United Nations as well as NATO and all these things. And if they are, well then, Canada has issues. Canada has issues. If you're going to deal with the world as it is, then Canada realizes they've got a Russia which is aggressively interested in realigning certain geographical positions and has staked a lot of effort on controlling Arctic regions, of which Canada has quite a lot of as well. So from a maritime security perspective, their key things are trade links with Europe, because that accounts for a huge amount of their trade. Probably building up their own internal infrastructure and possibly using maritime trade to get around the fact that quite a lot of their infrastructure in terms of fuel pipelines also dip into the United States, because that's been their traditional big partner. But if that's not going to be the traditional big partner, then Canada might have to start going, well, who are we going to trade with elsewhere to get that friendship, to make sure we build up that relationship? And next biggest market for them is either Asia or Europe, depending on your perspective. So they're going to have to think about these things, and they're going to have to work through it. Now, Canada has quite an interesting mix of high-tech industry and high-tech service-based economy, but also a huge amount of raw materials, raw goods, and agricultural. That puts them in quite a good position to trade with the world. It really does. I'm not saying they've always taken the best policies on that front, but it does put them in a good position to do so. From a maritime perspective, what they might want to do is what I think all three of these powers will probably want to do is take BAE up on their offer of being able to the fact that and BAEs have claimed this is capable of all their designs of being able to. There's a point in them that they can be divided down the middle and bits can be inserted. All the Type 26s will need to be expanded. All of them will need to be extended. Britain, Canada, Australia, all of them will need to be slightly bigger ships because you won't have the things coming behind you that you did traditionally. Now, whether or not your nation has chosen to get involved with the cooperative engagement capability which Raytheon have built for the US Navy and which is a really useful thing for integrating your forces. Both France and India seem to have, and Japan seem to have developed their own capabilities in this regard and have tried to develop their own systems. You are going to need that in a world without America to tie your alliance together. America has the big cooperative engagement capability. They have the big facilities that can allow things to talk to each other. So one of the reasons why I'm saying the Type 26 design is ripe to be expanded is BAE do apparently have this design function in all their designs where there is a point where they can be divided up and you can build space in them. And that space has got to go to something like a cooperative engagement capability system. And it might be that Canada, Britain, Australia combine to develop one. It might be that they buy the one off France. I don't know. They might buy the one off Japan. They might even buy the one off the Americans. But the thing is, if America may or may not be your ally in these situations, that might make such a system not so attractive because it can tie into American systems. Yes, that's great, but it does rather leave you exposed to someone who might decide that the war is not in their best interest and so not want to supply spare parts. This is the problem for American defense manufacturers. Isolationism is fine as long as there is a cast iron rules that they will not. That means they will supply arms when they're bought. Not they will go, well, no, we're not going to supply arms to you. Isolationism has to mean isolationism, otherwise it suddenly the defense industry becomes a lot less attractive because they might have the best weapons in the world. But if you end up fighting a fight and they don't like it, and they suddenly want to interfere, but they don't want to interfere, so they decide to just cut everyone off your supply of spare parts. You're up the creek without a paddle. That's a problem. So isolationism has got to mean we do not get involved. We supply the weapons, we don't get involved. Otherwise, it doesn't work from a defense supply perspective. But for Canada, the Type 26 program has plenty of options. It's a capable platform. It's a capable platform. They went for the slightly larger hull anyway. They need to expand that hull. They need to go for a slightly bigger option, and they need to do the work and infrastructure work to be able to do this. Would I do it necessarily on the ones currently under construction? It would depend on their phase of construction, because it's better to get unit hulls in the water at the moment and then improve them later. As said, you are theoretically supposed to be able to do it on the ships, so basically you do it on the ones which you can under construction and the ones which are when they start construction and the next ones, but on the ones which are too far along, you leave them, you get them into service and you deal with it later. Also, you kind of probably want to try and keep the Halifax class in service for as long as possible. But the big issue for Canada is going to be fighter coverage for the North, and it's going to be having a suitable, and I mean this important, this criteria, suitable systems to protect their Arctic and their maritime boundaries. And the DeWolf class, they're lightly armed, but they're good OPVs for Arctic security. I would like to see them upgraded with something like CAM, if possible, or something heavier in terms of their cannon. And the reason for that is not to turn them into frigates, but it's to give them a bit of an air defense capability for when they're in the Arctic. For when they're operating up there, they need something they need something basically to act as a deterrent. They don't need a lot of missiles. They need something so that you can't just go, oh yeah, well we can send any one of our a single aircraft with a couple of missiles and just lob that out. And just go, yeah, you can't do anything. No, it's got to be, you've got to mount a proper force. You can't mount a deniable attack. You can't claim this was one rogue pilot. You can't do any of that. You actually have to mount something. You have to erase that threshold. And it's not about militarizing the Arctic. Please note, I'm not advocating that. It's about raising the threshold of defense and of defense capability so that any opponent who wishes to attack you has to actually attack you. They have to do it openly. They can't cloak and dagger it. And that's sensible in a world where, if we think for a while, in a world that was imagined to be a unipolar world, basically, it was always imagined that America would always be able to go whoomp. And they would know. Their intelligence assets, all that information would mean they would know. So there was going to be no deniability, so you could afford to operate in the way we've been operating. But in an isolationist America world, that's not an option. And so you need to start raising that threshold again. So that you go, okay, you actually want to attack me, that's fine. If you do, then I will deal with that. But you're not going to be able to do a deniable attack. You're not going to be able to say it was a single rogue pilot or a single rogue crew. It's got to be a rogue frigging squadron, in which case no one's going to believe you. No one's going to believe you. And I would say this, and I'm talking about this from the maritime perspective because the Arctic to me is a maritime sphere. It also suddenly becomes a slight interest of maybe going for the Gripen or something else from or similar, especially the Gripen, because, well, if we consider where it's manufactured, where it comes from, it's kind of designed for that climate and with that climate in mind. And that would be helpful. Now, the big problem, the really big issue, is going to be if America restricts access to things like the P-8 program. The P-8 maritime patrol aircraft is a critical capability. Its potential replacements, if you're looking at them in similar capabilities, you're going to have to look at. Japan has some aircraft and some designs. Britain has done a lot of modifications on their P-8, so they're probably in a basis to maybe look towards manufacturing, but nothing's going to be quick. So your primary thing is going to be keeping your existing fleet of whatever you have going. Whatever you have going. The trouble is for Canada is their P-8s are supposed to be delivered between 2026 and 2027. They're supposed to be getting 16 of them. 16. I know, it's amazing. It's both not enough and yet still almost twice that of the British have got. And yeah. It's the big thing you'd lose in an Americanization world is the mass that's been relied upon. The USN operates 130 with another 10 on order of P-8s. When you consider the number of P-8s operating in the world, and the P-8s are the premier maritime patrol aircraft which the Allies rely on, when we consider them, they comprise 2/3 of both the ones ones on order, and more importantly, the vast majority of the ones in service. There are 72 on order or being operated by allied nations around the world in terms of P-8s. There are 130 with another roughly 10 on order in the US. And That's 2/3 of the capability of those allied nations, of those nations cooperated together. If you start looking at it and thinking about it that way, well, then everyone's going to have to crash order something else. Either they're going to get more P8s, if the Americans are considered a reliable ally, if they do go, we will never cut off the supply of arms, we will never stop selling these things or spare parts to you, in which case you could probably buy more P8s. Or alternatively, it's going to have to be European, probably Canadian involved as well, and I'm guessing South Korea and Japan involvement on an Airbus airframe to make an equivalent. And it's not going to be probably as good or as mature as the P8 is straight off the bat, but it's going to be better than nothing, and that's going to be a lot of what we will be talking about. But you're going to have to start that program very quickly, because, and this is why I'm talking about it in the next 5 year, 5 year scenario, because, well, you'd have to, the moment the America went isolation, you'd have to get that start that within the 5 years, because you've only got a certain amount of airframe life from those aircraft. Yes, the 737's a large pool to draw from, and so you can keep the airframes going, but the systems on the inside, that's more difficult. And it becomes especially more difficult once you realise that, again, the Americans have been very slow, it's almost a normal thing, to integrate other nations' weapon systems into their systems. They are always very keen on them being able to operate American-made weapon systems, but they haven't made it necessarily viable for Allied weapon systems to operate from them. So you only have a pool of weapon systems for so long, and they only last for so long. So again, it's how not just access to them, oh, we'll sell them to you, but it's also access to them of, can you rely on their delivery? Can you rely on their supply? So for Canada, it's going to be a thing of probably building more. It's going to be a case of procuring more maritime patrol aircraft, and probably something like the Gripen for the High North. They might end up having to have a 2-fighter fleet, a 2-aircraft fighter fleet, in which case their defense spending is going to have to go way up to sustain it. But the thing is, and this is the real problem, freedom ain't free. It ain't. It never has been. Nation statehood is expensive. Being a nation state and being a viable scenario is expensive. And if you are a paid up member of a system, and the system is going to help support you, that will allow you to share the burden. But the thing is, if the system goes through a period of tumult or completely changes as a major part of that system withdraws, then short to medium term, while the world reorganizes itself over probably the next 50 or so years, it's going to be a lot more expensive and you're going to have to pay for it. Which leads us to the Shameless book plug. Now, the Shameless book plug, especially if you're not used to this channel, and you might not be used to this channel because I can see this topic, it will either completely bomb or it will take off and I'll be going, oh good lord, this is like the Type 26 video again. Historian actually does something on moderate and sensible on Type 26, and suddenly everyone wants to watch it. The thing was, the number of people who were shocked about me correctly predicting what names would be chosen for the classes. I'm sort of going, it was really not rocket science. It was literally just which ones are going to be politically viable in this time period and balance with all the different people who are going to be stakeholders. But I explained that in that. So, Shameless book plug. This is my book. It's published by Pen and Sword and USNI. So, it's a fairly good one. I like it. Travels, Banners, Earrings. It's on its second edition. It's come out in both paperback and hardback. And I've got more coming. They're going to be by Kindle Direct Publishing. And basically, I use this point to say thank you and to advertise my book, because no one else is going to advertise my book but me. So, I advertise my book. I've also got a Spreadshirt store, which has various cool things on it, including this, which is Warship Design Paradigm, which I have got sneaked up because I did it years ago and I can do something better now. I can do a better graphic now. I've really got to improve that. Maybe I'll try and get ChatGPT to improve it in terms of making it clearer graphics. But no, it was a good one at the time, and it was good for my dog bandana. Although that's not my dog wearing it, I couldn't get a picture of my dog wearing them. They don't sit still that long. Wasn't that long. But with that all being said, this is also the part where I say thank you. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and also thank you for the super chats, the super thanks, and all the people who are members of the channel, who are patrons, who do the Ko-fi donations, all those things. Thank you. That really makes this all viable and makes it capable for me to spend. Well, I'd like to do 2 to 3 days of my 6-day week. And the 7th day, of course, is Sunday, when I'm live all day anyway on Twitch and YouTube. But we'll leave that to one side. 2 to 3, at least 2 to 3 days a week on YouTube stuff and doing the research and putting together the videos. And I can do that all because you support me. Because you make it financially viable. Because you mean that I can make it revenue neutral with all the books and things I buy to support it and do all that stuff because of you. So thank you. You're what makes the fun part of my life possible. But also I'm going to add in this, because some people don't seem to realise it. The subscribe button on YouTube. Okay, it's really cool. It's got a bell next to it. If it's a completely empty bell, then YouTube will go, oh, you like this channel? We might include it when we include it in your feed sometimes. If it's a outlined bell, YouTube goes, ooh, you quite like this channel. Okay, we're going to look through its videos and we're going to decide with our logarithm what you're going to like, what you think you'd like from their channel, and we'll show you that. If it's a filled-in bell, then you will get told of every single video we've produced when we produce it. And if you don't have your notifications turned on, you'll know exactly when we produce it. Now, myself, I have notifications turned on my phone, but I have my phone usually on silent. So they only flash up as visual things when I look in, and I can scroll down and go, oh, that one's produced, that person's produced that video. Or, oh, Drax finally produced. Please note, this is the fun thing. I'm in shipshape with Drac in NFL, the far more famous naval historian. And I also occasionally work with Sal Merkiagos of what is going on with shipping. And we used to come on Bilge Pumps quite regularly, which was a podcast that is going to be coming back soon for SimSec, the Centre for International Maritime Security. And when I see their videos come up and I look at them and go, oh, they talked about that topic with me a while back, and I need to interest that so I can see that. And I go and click on it. And I prefer that. I prefer that methodology than YouTube selecting it for me, because it means I get to choose. And I like being in control of my own fate as much as anyone can in this modern world. I do. That being said, let's go to Australia. Now, they have an even more interesting position than Canada in some regards, but also an easier one. They are a trading nation. They are a trading nation which lives on their coast. I have been there. It was lovely. The vast majority of people live well within the coastal regions of the nation. And whilst there are some settlements inland, having also visited Canberra, yeah, the vast majority are within what we would call the coastal range. In terms of strike range, tends to be anything up to 100 miles from the coast. And if you use that on Australia, that encompasses a lot. And then you sometimes go, well, we can actually strike quite capably up to 200 miles in from the coast. And while still being far enough offshore, they won't know where we are. They can't really pin down our location. So you want to be at least 100 to 200 miles out and be able to hit 200 miles inshore. At that point, it gets very uncomfortable once you start doing the analysis of Australia's population density and where it's spread out. Now, the thing is, again, they've got a Type 26 program. They've got all sorts of frigate programs. They've got all sorts of ideas. They have made cuts in some of those programs because their view of the changing world. But again, that was changing world based on America still being there. If America's not there, then frankly, Honestly, the ASW version of the Type 26 they probably need more of. Because look at how much trade they are dependent upon. How many lines of communication they have to check. And also, this is global trading routes. These are the global trading routes, but I could overlay that map with the global communications routes of all the undersea cables going across the world, and suddenly things become even more intriguing. All the internet access, all the data transference, because I know Elon Musk and others are doing a great job of telling you all about satellite communications and how important it is for data transference. And it is. But it's when you realize it handles like 5% of the volume. And that's best case scenario for it. That's best case scenario. The global network network of cables that really run the world around the oceans is somewhere in the ballpark of 500,000 miles long. Roughly 200 interconnected systems. Independent but interconnected systems. That is what the world's communications really depends upon. Now, again, in a world where America is able to supply all those P8s, and America is using all their Arleigh Burkes and all their other vessels as part of a global mission, but if they're withdrawing from alliances, they're not going to be forward basing. They're going to withdraw them back to American territory. They're going to withdraw them back to American areas. That means you have to step up and look at the nations around it. A nice way, the only one who's not dealing with again, and this is nothing, there is, and I stress this, the whole dashed lines, all the island disputes in the South China Sea, that is ancillary to this debate. It's happening whether America's isolationist or not. But what happens in this scenario is, if America's gone isolationist, then there's going to be a huge power vacuum, and those countries are going to be feeling very nervous. And Australia's problem is that it's only got to cross the people. And it doesn't want things to come to it. The last thing you want to be is the nation where the things come to you. You want to keep all problems as far away from you as possible. And that means they have to be able to support and give succor to their allies, the nations above them. They have to be able to support them. ASW frigates, high-tech units are going to be a key thing they can deploy their resources towards. Those nations can supply mass far easier than Australia can. What Australia can supply is high-tech. It's not so much an infantry battalion as a couple of frigates are really useful. High-tech fighter units, high-tech assets. Things which can make the maximum use of their population and their population's strengths, their industry, their education, their technological edge, all these things is going to be the advantage they seek, and they should seek. Because they can supply a lot of capabilities through that. Again, they're going to face issues. They're going to face huge issues trying to deal with this all. Now, the thing is, they have the AUKUS program, and again, whilst if the US leaves the AUKUS program and goes isolationist, then the British might well use, and the Australians might well agree that basically the Australians end up buying a version of the next generation British sub, which was also going to be the AUKUS submarine. And whilst there are a lot of American components which they wanted, if they can't now get them, and if the Britain is considered the safer ally, they probably go with Britain, and they would probably try to aim for facilities to be able to build domestically that can support them. The thing is, they just spent a lot of money and pledged a lot of money to America to help expand the facilities to get stuff off the Americans. It's going to be a case of, is that money still viable? Is America still selling that equipment to you? Do you still have faith in that equipment? With an isolationist America. That's the main problem, because I think myself and Isolationist America would still be prepared to sell its weapons, but whether the other nations would have faith in the supply of those weapons is a completely different matter. And it's kind of leads back to a lot of scenarios in history where a nation might go, well, my word is good. I've promised these things. Well, yes, but you promised other things and now you've withdrawn from them. And whilst you not now be promising this, I'm looking at your track record and I'm not worried about your reputation. I'm worried about my nation state. So I have to make decisions for my nation state in my interest. And that's fine. That's what you expect countries and peoples to do. And sometimes it's within their nation state's interest to work together, and sometimes it's to think about themselves. It would be interesting treaty-wise, but it would be a significantly changed world, and I'm fairly sure the British would probably get involved quite happily if they needed to step up. The interesting factor would be, would Canada want to get involved in this? Now that could worry America, but again, if they're withdrawing, then the Canadians can quite easily point out the fact that no longer can they rely on American nuclear-powered submarines and etc. helping secure their Arctic territories, operating under the Arctic ice, and no one really wants to do that with SSKs. To the extent that you have to with Canada, considering how far apart their bases are and where their basing units are. It's one thing operating in the Baltic and in the regions around Norway, and when you're keeping fairly close with your nation, you have bases you can get to. It's another thing when your bases are pretty much either side and you have to go all the way round to get to them. It's a logistical issue. So kind of like with Australia has found, trying to procure an SSK to replace the Collins class and end up being forced to go nuclear because of logistical issues, it's the same with Canada. If they decide to want to keep operating submarines, it's probably going to have to be nuclear. And probably going to have to be Canok or Ork Kenuk. Something. Australia, Canada, UK. It would be interesting, and I can see other partners potentially getting involved. It's not easy, but it's doable. The other thing for Australia, and this is going to be probably their biggest issue, is going to be dealing with the internal political debate about what they should spend money on and how they should spend money on, because there is a temptation, because they are this big island, this big continent, quite far away from everyone, that they can also ignore the world. But the reality is the world will come to them very quickly. They are not as far away from everyone as they imagine. And they don't have the population mass and size that America does in order to help keep themselves out of it. That's their real problem. So they will need to do some integrating. They will need to do some alliance. And there is honestly a possibility that NATO gets rebuilt into something which, well, Canada's already part of NATO, so NATO could well be reforged into something which includes Australia. Similarly with Five Eyes. Five Eyes could become Four Eyes, and they could have to do a lot of work. Or alternatively, they might add in other nations to it as well. It's going to change the world significantly. There's going to be a massive realliance of various nations and partners. I could honestly see a scenario where a version of Five Eyes appears which has Japan as a member. That's how different the world would be, because nations would be seeking friends who are like-minded and who they can work together to pool their resources, especially in the short to medium term, because it's going to take them a while to build up their own force and infrastructure. It's going to take them a while to build up their own things. So America can withdraw very quickly. But the rest of the world cannot rebuild and cannot upgrade and rearm that quickly, so they need to forge alliances very quickly. It would be a very unstable world for a good few years while they're sorting through it. And this leads us to Britain. Now, for Britain, there is actually a possible scenario where the government's traditional approach of salami slicing capabilities and keeping lots of different capabilities in very small amounts could actually be vindicated. And I cannot believe I'm saying that. Because they're going to need to rapidly expand everything. And I mean rapidly expand everything. For Britain, because of BAE, because that's British Aerospace Engineering, because of the other facilities they have here in the UK, and a lot of high-tech development and research going on, and a fairly mature nuclear industry, and a fairly mature shipyards and facilities, there are plenty of spaces for expansion. The first thing that probably would have to be done, and I would say this would be the easiest thing, is to work out what we need in terms of reordering, well, upping the orders of the existing supply lines that we're building on. So things like the Type 26, Type 31, submarines, all those will need to be upped. That's the big problem with helping out Canada or Australia in that scenario, is going to be Britain's going to need up its own supply of them as well. On top of that, there's going to be the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, and all this stuff is going to have to be crewed. So probably either the government's going to have to consider reintroducing national service, and all three nations might have to consider that one, or they're going to have to up the pay dramatically, especially for the RFA, because the RFA personnel, you are competing with merchant marine companies far more, and their skilled sailors can get paid more going on some other voyages. So you need to be careful about that. You need to be. Myself, rather than national service, I'd probably lower some of the criteria for service. Some of the fitness criteria, some of the things can be lowered for certain roles. And I'm not talking about making it, taking it down from, oh, you can be completely slovenly and everything and do this, but a few years ago I did some of the tests and I was looking at the ones for my age group. And whilst I could pass them, especially pre-pneumonia, I'm working up to being able to pass them again. Mainly because I use those tests as a metric for whether I'm actually fit and healthy or not. It works. They were a case of, well, okay, perhaps if you allow, instead of someone a certain of 3 months to get fit, you give them 6 months to get fit, and these sort of things to expand them. And are we really certain that asthma is especially non-chronic asthma, is something which should be ruling people out? And things like that. They are working on this. They have been working through these things over recent years and evaluating the stuff. And we were able to be very selective when the service was being slightly smaller. Now, if you're having to expand the services, you're going to have to be slightly less selective, and you're going to have to be prepared to do a lot more basic training to improve them and to get them up to the standard you require. And again, there's also the age of personnel. One of the things I often thought strange was we need skilled personnel at all sorts of points in the armed forces, but for me, some of the staffs in the UK and some of the, especially the Ministry of Defence positions, etc., why are we still applying the same age rules to those as we do the rest of the forces? Surely it'd be better to go, right, we've got a really active, really knowledgeable warrant officer, or who's done 20 odd years of service, they're still quite fit and healthy, but we don't want to use them for a field role because they're not healthy enough. They'd be happy to stay in for another few years. Well, we have a staff position. Can we use them for that? Can we use them for those roles? I've often wondered why, and this was a policy which has been considered a fair number of times in the past, why people put in charge of projects tend to be serving personnel. And that's, you want experience and knowledge, and I do understand that. But why not go, well, we've got a captain who's about up for retirement. Do you want to retire, or would you mind taking over as project head for this program until it enters service? That could be another 5-10 years. Well, that's fine. We'll take that. Oh, and by the way, it's basically, we'll give you a rank of Commodore while you're doing it. That's fine. You stay in that role for the next 5-10 years instead of that being a post which is going to be okay, now I've got to rotate them out for their career development to this other role and this role. No, you need active personnel. You need personnel who are currently serving and who have knowledge to do things such as write the specifications for a program and write the requirements for a program and work through those and work how to use it. But to oversee a project under its construction and through its development and delivery, surely the best use of all those skills you spent training those people to have and the knowledge base they have to understand and build their base from could be used to using retired people. People about to retire. It would make sense. There are options, therefore. Now, this is the build hall. This is the build hall at Barrow. And again, there is actually more space in there than it looks sometimes. You can actually build more units in there than we sometimes are building in terms of some of the assembly space off to different sides and different points where you can have in various stages. You can have 5 hulls in various stages of construction in that hall. And again, I remember seeing that on a BAE publication at some point years ago, I think. So it probably need to be expanded. Britain, if they play if the government and the nation play its cards right, could really benefit from an isolationist America, as we can supply a lot of the things which America would no longer be supplying. We have the tech to, we just don't have the mass and volume of production to at the point, so we'd have to invest in that and grow that. That'd be useful. But pretty much for Britain, it would be get the programs into service. Again, the cooperative engagement system capability is something which we should have. The fact it's being deleted from the Type 45s when they were being built, it was deleted from the Type 26. It's been deleted from all those things because it keeps being added in as something we need to get, and then it's deleted because, well, I'm presuming some accountant says, or some, what are they called? Value engineer was the last time I heard the phrase. Said it. Well, no, for what it offers versus its cost, it's not worth it for our needs. I'm not sure what they're smoking. A cooperative engagement capability allows you to link all the platforms together and engage, and be able to use sensors from one platform to guide weapons systems from another platform, and it makes it a lot more sensible. It turns pretty much every platform can be missile trucks for other platforms if necessary. And I think that's a great idea. It's a really useful tool. And getting that set up, that's going to require some time. But it will need to be done. I would also think potentially for Britain, and this is another issue, is that the vessels we're looking at for our literal presence vessel, our literal combat sort of little ships, and the literal support groups. Whilst I still think the small designs which they're looking at and the multi-role support ships and their systems that they're looking at need to be put in place, I would argue strongly that either Albion and Bulwark need to not be finished their sail, but I think that's unlikely. I would say we probably would need to buy some LHDs. But the big problem for Britain is going to be its dependence upon the F-35. Now, you can keep those going for a while, like you can keep Trident going for a while, and we've got the submarines, but you're going to have to look into what you're going to replace them with quite quickly. What are you going to replace Trident with is an interesting one. Now, the French Navy seem fairly happy with their M51s, and they're probably going to keep those as their capability. But the trouble is for Britain is we have set up a system whereby we are using cooperation with France to maintain our warheads. It's a joint program, and we use cooperation with America to maintain our missiles. If we go the French route, whilst it's the quickest route, it's also going to mean we're dependent upon them completely for it. And that's a problem. And before anyone starts saying, oh, the Trident missiles can be interfered with, they really can't. There are so many issues with trying to interfere with Trident missiles. It's and setting up such a system, it's beyond belief. There are other ways to do it without interfering with missiles. It's kind of like people going, there's a kill switch on the F-35s. There isn't. They don't need there to be one. There's a planning and integrated logistics system for the F-35, and if that thing shuts down, which it probably which it wouldn't under this scenario, but possibly and the likeliness of this scenario, but let's be honest, how much faith are people going to have in it continuing on in war scenarios is going to be another thing. So the F-35 won't cease to operate, but it'll be a case of we're rapidly looking to replace the system and change things. But there are going to be a lot of other nations looking for that as well. But that's not going to be within a 5-year. That's going to be a development program that might have to be added onto the Tempest program. And that would be really interesting to watch that be added into the Tempest program. Go, right, and you're going to have to produce two variants of the Tempest. A fixed-wing aircraft, a normal fixed-wing operating aircraft, and a Vistol variant. That would way to cause the program to explode in cost, but that might be what's necessary. Or alternatively, it might be easier overall to, again, theoretically, the Queen Elizabeth's like all BAE designs have a point which they can be divided in the middle and can be added to, and add in more power generation, add in more engines, add in more hangar space, and make it a angled, wider, sort of angled flight deck carrier with catapults and with emails and etc. But again, that's going to be problematic because the email supplier in the world is American. So all these things are going to have to be worked on. That is an issue. That is going to be well outside the that's going to take us well outside the 5-year period. The ballistic missile situation is going to have to be decided within that 5-year period. What we're going to do. Honestly, considering the various programs the UK has and the various knowledge bases the UK has, you could probably set up a joint development for a next generation missile with the French and have production both in UK and France. You could probably develop some sort of joint system, or alternative, and other powers might want to get involved again. And Isolationist America might well lead to other powers going, you know what, we need nuclear weapons. And the non-proliferation treaties are great when America and as the major powers are willing to enforce the world order. When they're not, the temptation for some nations, especially nations which are of suitable size and suitable security concerns, is going to be quite great. So expect an Isolationist America to lead to a lot more nuclear proliferation. Open nuclear proliferation. But it would be a mess. And that's the ultimate thing on this scenario. The world would be in a mess. And again, Britain's going to have to increase its maritime patrol aircraft. Again, there's the whole thing of P8 or not P8. Debates they'll have. They're going to have to increase the tempo of Type 26 and Type 31s and Type 32s, which follow on for the 31s. And we're all fairly certain where the Type 32 is going to come from, because we've got a yard which various unions, etc., and the ownership of the yard have had governments sign agreements that they're going to give it provide it with a certain amount of work over a certain amount of time in order to justify keeping it open and investing in it. And so if the government don't, there's huge bills and repercussions coming away. So yeah, that probably means the Type 32 is coming whatever happens. Because basically the Type 32 was batch 2 Type 31 and it always was going to be. It's industrial policy. It's not procurement. It's industrial policy. But for Britain, it's going to depend on what the government does and what the government chooses to do. The worst scenario for Britain would be NATO falling apart and there being no alliance structure replacing it to enforce commonality of standards, so commonality of ability to work together, and Britain finding itself in a situation where there is no NATO. and having to go it completely solo and having to forge whole new alliances. Now, people at this point will point to the European Union, etc., but the thing is, and I say this with the nicest intention and not wishing to get into that whole Brexit, pro-anti-Brexit fight or pro-anti-European Union fight, there is going to be so many problems going on in a Europe which is suddenly dealing with nations worrying about their security and being fearful, that it is going to be consumed by that. Now, people are going to look at, there's Germany and France are probably going to feel okay, but how are the Poland and Eastern Europe going to feel with NATO collapsing? They are suddenly going to be arming up like anything. They are going to be really worried about their borders, because they're going to look at what's happened to other nations, which, in a world where might makes right, you suddenly need a lot of might on your side to make sure you're okay. And if you've lost the alliance with the mightiest, you're going to have to fill that in very quickly. And how much of a faith are you going to place in a multinational alliance where any country can pretty much hold the things up by just being obstropolous? As said, it'll be a mess. Normally I finish these videos with a question, but I don't think this is going to require any question for me to start the comments off. So I'll look forward to reading comments. Please, I would say this, but I'm going to keep it. This is the same rules as I enforce in chat. Discussions are open. Being personally rude to people, not. Okay? Disagreeing is fine. In fact, that's encouraged. Having friendly debates, having discussions, is always good. But the thing is, and I've ascribed to this view from my entire life, since my grandfather taught it to me when I was a very young kid. If my only retort to a person is to be insulting to them, rather than arguing back with evidence and logic, or analysis at the very least, of what is likely to happen, then I've lost the debate and I should walk away. Because I've lost. That being said, what have we got coming up? We have Philip Vian coming up this week, and I'm hoping also to get Emperor Pertinax, which has been waiting for a while because I was having computer issues as well. So hopefully those will be the Tuesday and Wednesday videos this week. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Brew Ships will be on Sunday, and Brew Ships will be as always this week. It's a question answer session where it's live. You ask questions, I answer them hopefully, or I give the best answer I can do, or say when I don't know. But I always enjoy it, and I look forward to seeing what questions turn up. Thank you very much, and take care.